So why are Microsoft re-releasing the original Gears of War in 2025? Why aren't we seeing a sequel to Gears 5? As someone who played the original Gears of War when it was first released on the Xbox 360 and considers it to be one of the finest action games of all time, why am I skeptical about this move from Microsoft? In this video, I'll be exploring what made the original Gears of War so impactful, not only for its gameplay, sound and graphics, but what made the characters and story resonate on a deeper symbolic level. Is it just another dude bro shooter about meat-headed Marines that's stuck in the past and perpetuating harmful stereotypes? Why was it necessary for Microsoft and the Coalition to resurrect the original game to draw us in again, given that their plan was to replace Marcus Phoenix with a strong female lead, a trope that has ironically become a stereotype in its own right in modern games? Will they finally be giving gamers what they want? Or will this be another bait and switch, bringing back the original cast only to deconstruct and replace them all over again? Stick around to find out why almost 20 years later, the original Gears of War feels as refreshing as it is familiar. It's the return of the king. I went back and listened to a talk given by Cliff Bleszinski, the lead game designer, from 2007 at the Game Developers Conference in preparation for this review. He strikes me as an intuitive person. He said that when he starts making a game, he doesn't really know what he's doing. He has a couple of ideas and then just goes with it, feeling things out. I don't always think that fun is one of those things that you can plan in excruciating detail in a design document, he said. I think it's one of those things that you feel through, unquote. I wonder whether his deeply intuitive approach to making Gears of War is what made it such a powerful work of interactive entertainment, because it was so unconstrained by our modern sensibilities and political correctness. It just sounds like they really wanted to make an awesome game, and that creative freedom and focus on fun enabled them to tap into deep archetypal patterns of storytelling, allowing them to design a game without fear. Listening to a younger Cliff Bleszinski made for an interesting contrast with an older Cliff, who recognized that his 2020 game, Lawbreakers, failed commercially because it was, quote, too woke, unquote. He claimed that implementing progressive policies such as having gender-neutral bathrooms and not sexualizing female characters alienated parts of the gaming audience and contributed to the game's poor sales. But in 2007, the younger Cliff was unrestrained by a desire to challenge traditional ideas, enabling him and his team to draw upon universal themes and archetypes that are better able to connect with people and elicit a sense of fun and excitement, rather than a game that reimagines or subverts these symbols and just ends up provoking a different kind of reaction in people. He was not trying to advocate for a political cause, he just wanted to make an awesome video game, which is precisely what he did. Now, the original Gears of War started off as a game called Unreal Warfare. It was going to be a large-scale, vehicular-based operation. The developers were fans of games like Tribes and Team Fortress, featuring character classes such as medics and engineers, so they thought maybe they should do something with vehicles and territory control. But in the process of brainstorming their game, one of the original pitches they came up with was an idea that they titled Resident Kill Switch. He was a big fan of the Resident Evil games and loved the horror elements and pacing of them. Then he saw the game Kill Switch, which Cliffy considered to have the best implementation of a cover system he had ever seen. Flying around, taking cover and blind firing around corners. At that point, what would become Gears of War had no cover system. It was an FPS with large-scale vehicular combat. However, they then realized that they could enhance the game's pacing by refining the cover dynamic, making it easier to use, more intuitive, and most importantly, more fun. They also initially considered implementing a morale system in the game, where your squad mates could become panicked and afraid. However, they ultimately gave up on this approach as they didn't want the game to spiral into a negative feedback loop, which ultimately wouldn't be enjoyable for the player. Their priority was making a fun game. But as intuitive as he sounds in the talk, he says that iteration without control is chaos and anarchy. You need to have guidelines. You need to have rules for what your game is about. Now, one of the rules that I picked out, which I found quite interesting and will help us transition into talking about the finished game, is about the bad guys in the game. They said, right, we do not want to have any aliens from space. The villains in this game were going to be from the underground of the planet. And this, of course, would make for all kinds of interesting scenarios of seeing holes burst out of the earth and creatures pouring out of it. So let's talk about the world that they created for this game. Gears of War is set on the fictional planet of Sera, once a lush and verdant world, now desolate and ravaged by war. The story begins with the emergence of the Locust Horde, a nightmarish race that rises from beneath the Earth's surface to wage war against humanity. The Locust's brutal assault reduces Sera to ruins, and what remains of human civilization takes refuge in underground cities known as Jacinos. Now, the graphics in Gears of War, both in the original version and in this remastered 2025 version, are an absolute masterclass in visual storytelling. The game's setting draws significant inspiration from European architecture, particularly from London, with the original title's design influenced by a trip Cliff Bleszinski took to the British capital, which included views of St. Paul's Cathedral and the city's architecture. The overall aesthetic is characterised by a blend of styles, incorporating aspects of Regency Britain, which contributes to the game's distinctive look. Now, going back to Cliff's 2007 talk at GDC, it's interesting to hear about how they developed the baddies for this game. The Locusts were originally called Geist, but after doing a trademark search, they found that Nintendo had already developed a game called Geist, Geist being the German word for ghost. So they brainstormed and came up with the name The Worms, because they were creatures from the underground of the planet. But they weren't happy with that and went back to the drawing board until they eventually came up with the idea that they ended up with, which was the name Locusts, which he says in his talk is a very unsettling name and implies a plague. So I just found it really interesting, the whole creative process and these legal obstacles that they faced, and how as a consequence of that the story had to evolve and the characters had to change and adapt. And I think what they ended up with was a far more powerful name and concept for the villains. The Locusts are creatures of the underworld, and why that's such a powerful thing is in terms of the symbolism of the underworld. We know that the ancient Greeks had a concept of the underworld known as Hades, which was the realm of the dead, or a place of suffering and torment. In Mesoamerican mythology, it's associated with a similar concept. Psychologically, the underworld is associated with the unconscious mind, or the depths of the psyche, from which our fears and shadows emerge. And this is the place where the Locusts emerge from. Darkness is now bursting free to challenge and bring chaos to civilization. And I really like the name they went with as well, the Locusts. In many ancient myths, locusts are seen as a symbol of fertility, but in the most influential narrative of Western civilization, the biblical story, they are famously associated with one of the 10 plagues in Egypt in the book of Exodus. And they've often been understood by Christian theologians as a sign of judgment and a punishment for sin. In fact, their own insatiable appetite and destructive behavior perfectly symbolize the nature of sin. Just as locusts devour everything, so does sin consume all that is good. And finally, the serpentine appearance of the locusts in the game taps into the mythologies of chaos monsters, such as Tiamat from Mesopotamia, who emerges from the depths to bring chaos to the world. The physical degradation of the world of Sera also symbolizes the moral decay of a once great civilization, capable of building beautiful, transcendent, and holy architecture, which has enabled the locust horde to emerge from the underworld, much like a decadent society reaching its inevitable end. There's a bit early on in the game where you see this perfectly encapsulated in a scene where a statue is destroyed as the locusts emerge from underground, desecrating this holy architecture. And this theme of civilizational destruction, with cathedrals and temples everywhere in ruins, evokes a kind of battle between tradition and the invasion of the other. But just as society falls into complete disarray, so too does the age of chaos become the heroic age, as certain men are inspired to rise above the decadence and become heroes, fighting to defend their homeland, and in one particular case, seeking atonement for his past mistakes. Enter Marcus Phoenix. We take control of him 14 years after the first emergence of the Locust, and he's been in prison for the past 4 years of that conflict. Marcus was a famous war hero, now turned criminal, convicted and imprisoned for leading a failed, unauthorized mission to rescue his father, Adam. Another interesting bit of symbolism. Even his family name, Phoenix, is the name of a mythical bird reborn from the ashes, and what better symbol for hope and renewal for the world of Sera among its ruined cathedrals and lost faith. Marcus's physical scars and emotional stoicism also harken back to Marcus Aurelius, the well-known philosopher and emperor who led Rome during devastating wars with the barbarians. His writings emphasized resilience, duty, and acceptance of hardship as a moral imperative. Marcus Phoenix too will step up to lead the battle to save Sera from the otherness of the Locust Horde. Although Marcus is an anti-hero, He respects authority and hierarchy. He addresses his lieutenant, Kim, as Sir. He is respectful and understands the chain of command, and eventually accepts his role as the leader. When he's summoned at the beginning of the game, he's dwelling in darkness, in a prison, considered a traitor. This is where he begins his redemption arc, as he embarks on his trial as a warrior. But Marcus Phoenix is no mere protagonist. He is the embodiment of the stoic warrior archetype, a figure whose strength lies not just in his muscles, but in his moral resolve. And the supporting characters like Dom, Baird, and Cole are also archetypes made flesh. Dom represents loyalty and camaraderie, while Baird embodies the archetype of the reluctant hero. Their interactions are not just banter, they are a symbolic dialogue about duty, sacrifice, and brotherhood. Their relationship exemplifies how these bonds can sustain individuals and societies, even during the darkest time. Let's talk about the combat. Now, one of Cliff Bleszinski's other rules during development was that the game was to be a slower paced game. Not a run and gun game, but a stop and pop game. The game would feature a crosshair, which would be activated by pulling down the left trigger on the controller, and would give you a limited peripheral vision. The player could run in the game, but when he did, the camera would wobble, and he couldn't shoot while running, which allowed for a design trade-off, and enabled the player to make a choice between the two. And this helped create a distinctly unique feel to the combat, coupled with a variety of battle situations that take the player through narrow encounters in corridors, all the way to larger settings in derelict town squares, as wave after wave of locusts emerge from beneath. In some places spawning in from one location, to situations where they pour in from all around you. In those situations, you really feel like you are engaging in a war, and the cover system means that you often literally have your back against the wall. And it constantly feels brutally fun. The combat system is visceral, punishing, and deeply satisfying. It's like a dance of survival that taps into the player's primal instincts. The chainsaw in particular is of course horrific, but there's something ritualistic about it, like a bloody sacrifice. Sound design elevates the experience of the combat into the realm of the sublime. The roar of the lancer's chainsaw, the crunch of sand under boots, and the bone-rattling bass of explosions resonate and ground the player in a world where every action carries weight. The combat is not subverted or sanitized. It's rendered with raw, unflinching honesty. So then, 18 years later, in 2025, it's evident that the AAA games industry has shifted its priorities significantly. Developers are now focusing on creating more inclusive experiences that boost representation of marginalized communities and actively work to avoid stereotypes. This shift invites us to examine the modern gaming landscape and how it contrasts with this earlier approach to storytelling and character design. Now, 2019 was the last time Microsoft released a new Gears of War game in the form of Gears 5. It explores themes of trauma and identity with a more introspective main character. Gears 5's developers consciously attempt to reimagine the story through a lens of inclusivity and modern values, but it risks diluting the archetypal power that made the original so resonant. One video game website had this to say about the Gears of War re-release. Gears of War Reloaded is a relic of the past. Now let's get the obvious out of the way. Gears of War is a hell of a good time. Its campaign is tight, clocking in at around 6 hours or so, and its 5 acts shepherd Marcus Phoenix and his squad mates from level to level, set piece to set piece. The Locusts are coming, and they ain't stopping. Perhaps most impressive in terms of Gears' gameplay is its cover system. It offers a range of fluid movement for Phoenix and isn't clunky. Unlike some other games of its time, the gunplay is top-notch, with a solid variety of weapons available to Phoenix. Though I mainly stuck with the Lancer assault rifle, using the chainsaw bayonet on a Locust is as entertaining in 2025 as it was in 2006. So it's clear that the journalist enjoyed his time with the game. He goes on to say this: however, upon revisiting Gears of War, what stands out most is just how thin its story and characters are. Beyond his of an era soul patch, there's not much to Marcus Phoenix. He starts by getting broken out of prison, and his trial is alluded to in a glance at your phone and you'll miss it moment, but his circumstances before the opening of Gears of War never matter much. He's out and now tasked with killing Locust, and dagnabbit, that's just what he's going to do. Phoenix and the rest of his squad are your stereotypical block-headed Marines with biceps larger than NFL NFL footballs. They're all macho men, with a token woman, Anya, making an early appearance before being relegated to only appearing via audio, doling out instructions. Like Phoenix, there's not a lot to any of them beyond their gruff military personalities. And later he says, and sure, players can rightfully want to shut their brains off and shoot some alien monsters. Shooting aliens is great. It's why I wanted to play Gears again. However, remasters offer an excellent opportunity to revisit the past through a new lens and reflect on this piece of entertainment against the backdrop of its time. Later Gears of War installments provided more depth to the human versus locust conflict at the heart of the series and made strides to be more inclusive, with its fifth entry starring its first female protagonist. Gears 5 stands in sharp contrast to the original Gears, which was wafer thin. And this journalist is not alone in being critical of Marcus Phoenix for being a, quote, block-headed marine with a soul patch and not much else. But let's dissect this through the lens of myth. Joseph Campbell said heroes aren't about detailed backstories. They're archetypes, vessels for universal truths. Marcus isn't Shakespeare, he's Hercules, Beowulf, or Gilgamesh, a warrior stripped to his essence, fighting not just for survival, but for order itself. Notice how little we learn about him? That's intentional. His blankness lets us project humanity's collective unconscious onto him. Modern games like Gears 5 pad their narratives with character quirks and politically correct-driven protagonists, but that can dilute the myth. By contrast, remastered Gears clings to tradition. Though its cast is drawn from multicultural ethnic backgrounds, they are ultimately just a band of archetypal warriors bound by duty, a far cry from today's obsession with representation over resonance. Now, the critics might call them stereotypical, but Jungian archetypes are stereotypes by design. They're universal. Dom is the loyal comrade, Cole the gruff everyman. They're icons of brotherhood, sacrifice, and resilience. Even Anya's audio-only role isn't an oversight. It keeps her symbolic. She becomes like a voice from above, like Athena guiding Odysseus. Archetypes are finely tuned patterns that are not arbitrarily defined. They're universally recognizable, carrying profound symbolic weight with them. Deconstructing them can dilute or even negate their thematic power, leading to stories that struggle to convey meaningful messages. Archetypes tap into our collective unconscious, evoking strong emotional responses. Deconstructing them can result in stories that struggle to evoke similar emotions, leading to less resonant experiences. Symbolic depth cannot be rewritten without consequence. The remastered version preserves the timeless patterns, the hero's journey, the warrior's sacrifice, and the confrontation with shadow. It is a quiet act of faith in tradition, resisting the modern urge to deconstruct what has endured for millennia. So, Marcus Phoenix re-emerges at a time when the video game industry, like the world of Serra, has lost its way. A timely reminder of the power and importance of tradition, archetypes and symbols, how they resonate with us, and how big budget video games can be fun again. If you like this video, please leave a like and subscribe, and tell me what you think about the contrast between Cliff's approach to game design from 2007 and the way in which modern AAA games are being designed. Is Marcus just a big dumb stereotype, or is he an archetype? Till next time.